the family time forgot. In 1978, a Soviet helicopter searching for iron ore over the Siberian taiga spotted something impossible: a garden patch 250 kilometers from civilization. Maps insisted this land was a desolate wilderness, but hidden beneath the canopy was a family living in total isolation for 42 years. They had lived through the Great Depression and the birth of the computer, yet most incredibly, they had no idea that World War II had ever happened. We often think of World War II as unavoidable, a global firestorm of bombs and shifting borders. In our world of instant news, being oblivious to it seems impossible. But for the Lykovs, time had effectively stopped in 1936. They weren't victims of a crash. They had voluntarily wiped themselves off the map to escape religious persecution. To escape religious persecution, Karp Lykov led his wife and 2 children deep into the Siberian wilderness. They brought only a few seeds, primitive tools, and an unshakable faith. For over 40 years, they saw no other humans. Their 2 youngest children had never even seen a house, a road, or anyone outside their own family. Their life was a masterpiece of survival. When their last metal pots rusted away, they were forced back into the Stone Age, weaving shoes from tree bark and carving wooden utensils. When food was scarce, they survived on bark and roots to endure the brutal, +40°C Siberian winters. When geologists finally found them in 1978, the Lykovs were baffled by the most mundane modern objects. They knew of stars that moved quickly across the sky, which were actually satellites, but they couldn't fathom that man had set foot on the moon. But here is the most staggering detail. When told about World War II, Karp Lykov remained silent. To him, the collapse of empires and atomic bombs were just distant noises from another planet. His world was confined to a few square meters of potato patches and his prayers. The true tragedy, however, struck after they were discovered. Reconnecting with the modern world brought enemies they had no weapons to fight: bacteria. Within years of their discovery, 3 of the 4 children passed away from common illnesses their bodies had never encountered. The Lykovs didn't just miss a war, they built a fortress of solitude to protect their beliefs, only for the world's curiosity to eventually shatter it. Their story leaves us with a haunting question: is knowing everything about the world a privilege? Or is ignorance sometimes the only way to find absolute peace? The Glass Trap. On September 26, 1991, 8 scientists wearing futuristic blue jumpsuits stepped through a sealed steel door in the Arizona desert. Their mission? To survive for 2 years inside a completely closed ecosystem, with zero help from the outside world. This was Biosphere 2, a massive glass structure containing an ocean, a rainforest, and even a desert. It was hailed as the stepping stone for colonizing Mars, but instead of a scientific utopia, it quickly spiraled into a suffocating nightmare as the fake Earth began to turn on its own inhabitants. This $150 million marvel spanned 3 acres, housing 5 biomes and thousands of species to replicate the balance of Earth itself. The world believed that with precise calculations, we could finally master nature in a glass jar. The 8 biospherians entered with confident smiles, certain they were shaping the future of humanity. But Earth isn't as simple as a mathematical equation. Within months, the system began to fail in ways no one predicted. The oxygen in this fake Earth started vanishing mysteriously, plummeting from 21% to a dangerous 14%, the equivalent of being 13,000 feet up a mountain. The scientists became lethargic, exhausted, and struggled to breathe even while asleep. But oxygen wasn't the only thing disappearing. The culprit of the oxygen heist turned out to be something as mundane as concrete. The massive concrete slabs used to build the structure were absorbing oxygen and releasing CO2 like a giant sponge. The ecosystem soon became a biological horror movie. Insects died off, leaving trees barren, while millions of crazy ants overran the facility. Morning glory vines grew into green monsters, choking out sunlight and strangling other plants. The scientists fell into chronic starvation, losing between 13% and 52% of their body weight. Hunger and oxygen deprivation shattered their morale. The group split into 2 hostile factions, refusing to speak and even spitting on each other. Biosphere 2 was no longer a lab, it was a brutal survival arena. Eventually, management had to secretly pump in oxygen, a move that officially admitted the failure of the closed experiment. When the 8 scientists finally emerged in 1993, They looked like skeletons returning from a distant planet. Biosphere 2 taught us a costly lesson. We can build glass pyramids worth hundreds of millions, but we still cannot replicate the complexity of a natural ecosystem. It serves as a haunting reminder. Our current Earth is not easily replaceable. We spend billions trying to build a fake Earth on Mars, while the original is rotting away under our watch. Are we locking ourselves into another glass cage without even knowing it? The 5,000-year murder. Imagine you're hiking through the majestic Alps on the border of Austria and Italy. Amidst the melting snow, you suddenly spot a hand and part of a human back poking out of the ice. You immediately call the police, thinking you found a lost hiker who met a tragic end a few years ago. But when experts arrive, they realize this is no ordinary accident. They are standing over a crime scene that has been frozen for 5,300 years. We long pictured Neolithic ancestors as clumsy cavemen in tattered furs, lacking any real technology. But the 1991 discovery of Ötzi the Iceman shattered those stereotypes. When the ice thawed, it revealed a perfect file of high-tech gear from 5 millennia ago that stunned the scientific world. He wasn't primitive at all. In fact, his equipment was the designer gear of the Copper Age. Instead of crude wraps, Ötzi wore sophisticated boots, bare skin for durability, bark fiber mesh, and hay insulation, essentially the high-end hiking gear of his era. But the real game-changer was his axe. Before Ötzi, historians believed humans hadn't mastered metalwork at such a high level. Yet, Ötzi carried an axe made of 99.7% pure copper. This was the Ferrari of prehistory, a symbol of power and status we didn't think existed in 3300 BC. And here's the most dramatic part. Ötzi didn't die of old age or the cold. X-rays revealed a stone arrowhead lodged deep in his left shoulder. It had severed a major artery, causing him to bleed out in minutes. Someone had hunted him down to an altitude of 3,200 meters and shot him in the back. This is the oldest unsolved murder mystery in human history. From his remains, we know his last meal, ibex meat and grains, his ailments, shown by ancient tattoos at acupuncture points, and his desperate final flight. Ötzi isn't just an ancient mummy, he is a biological hard drive preserved by the ice. He reminds us that 5,300 years ago, our ancestors were just as clever, resourceful, and prone to brutal conflict as we are today. The Jungle Ghost. Imagine it's 1974. Humans have walked on the moon, ABBA is topping the charts, and World War II ended nearly 30 years ago. But on the tiny island of Lubang in the Philippines, a ghost from the past is still on the prowl. A gaunt man in a tattered Imperial Japanese Army uniform, clutching a pristine Arisaka rifle. He isn't lost, and he isn't insane. He is following the only order he received in 1944. At all costs, never surrender. When Japan surrendered in 1945, millions laid down their arms to rebuild. It was the end of a dark chapter for everyone but Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. A guerrilla specialist, Onoda was trained to believe Japan never quits. Any news of surrender was merely a cunning enemy trap. What makes Onoda's story staggering isn't just that he survived in the jungle for 29 years, it's that he refused to believe in reality. For 3 decades, planes dropped thousands of leaflets, newspapers, and even handwritten letters from his family. Onoda read them all, but his conclusion? Fake news. He believed his family was being coerced, and the newspapers were sophisticated American propaganda designed to lure him out. To Onoda, the outside world was one giant lie. For nearly 30 years, Onoda lived as a jungle phantom. He survived on bananas, coconuts, and the occasional stolen cow. He kept his rifle spotless and hoarded every bullet like treasure. To the locals, he was a terrifying mountain monster, responsible for sabotaging farms and causing over 30 casualties because he believed they were enemy spies. Onoda's persistence was a miracle of survival, but a tragedy of perception. In 1974, explorer Norio Suzuki tracked him down. Suzuki said, "The war is over, come home." But Onoda coldly refused. He insisted, "I will not surrender unless my commanding officer orders me to." The Japanese government had to track down his old commander, now an elderly bookseller, and fly him to Lubang. Only when standing before his superior, hearing the official order to stand down, did Onoda finally drop his weapon, burst into tears, and hand over his samurai sword. Upon his return in 1974, Onoda became a symbol of the Bushido spirit, but he was a stranger in his own land. He saw a Japan of skyscrapers and Western culture that he couldn't comprehend. His story isn't just about survival, it's about the terrifying power of belief. It asks a painful question. If you spend your life fighting for a dead ideal, is it great loyalty or a wasted tragedy? Onoda kept his promise, but the price was 29 years trapped in a war the world had long forgotten. 10 Days in Hell. In 1887, a young woman with a vacant stare appeared at a New York boarding house. She talked to herself, acted terrified of others, and claimed to have lost her memory. Within days, doctors and judges reached a verdict. She was insane and needed to be committed to Blackwell's Island, an asylum known as a black hole from which no one returned. But there was one thing the experts missed. The woman was perfectly sane. Her name was Nellie Bly, and she had just pulled off one of the most dangerous undercover operations in journalism history. She didn't go in to get help. She went in to expose a truth the world had chosen to ignore. In the late 19th century, asylums were warehouses for society's outcasts. Publicly, they were seen as havens of care, but the reality inside Blackwell's was a mystery. Those who left rarely had the mental capacity to tell their story. To get inside, Nellie Bly spent nights in front of a mirror practicing the stare of a madwoman. She posed as a poor immigrant named Nellie Brown. The strangest twist? As soon as she entered the asylum, Nellie Bly stopped acting. She spoke normally and behaved as rationally as anyone else. But the terrifying part was, the more sane she acted, the more the doctors insisted she was crazy. To them, her sanity was just a sophisticated mask for her madness. She was trapped in her own snare. What Nellie witnessed over the next 10 days was a real-life horror movie. She described meals consisting of rotten bread and maggot-infested water. She was forced into ice-cold baths while guards used scrub brushes on her skin until it bled. Sane patients were beaten, tied to chairs all day, and left in such isolation that they actually did go mad. Nellie realized Blackwell's Island was a human grinder, designed to turn the sane into lunatics. After 10 days, her newspaper intervened to release her. Her investigation forced a complete overhaul of America's mental health management. Nellie Bly proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against cruelty isn't a gun, but a pen, and the courage to step into the dark. She locked herself in a place the world wanted to escape, just to bring the light of justice back. In a world where we judge so easily by appearances, how many modern Nellie Blys are willing to enter the shadows for those who have no voice? The girl who fell from the sky. Imagine you're sitting on a plane at 10,000 feet. The sky is pitch black, lightning tears through the air, and suddenly, a deafening explosion. The plane disintegrates. Instead of falling with the wreckage, you find yourself still strapped to your seat, plummeting toward the dense Amazon rainforest like a speck of dust in a storm. Most would die of fright before hitting the ground. But for 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke, that fall was just the beginning. She didn't just survive a free fall from the sky. She walked out of the green hell alone after 11 days. How did she do it? The Amazon is a death trap known as the Green Hell, home to jaguars, anacondas, and lethal insects. For most, being abandoned here is a death sentence. We assume modern humans are helpless without technology, but Juliane was no ordinary girl. The first miracle was that Juliane survived the fall without breaking a single major bone. Scientists later believed her seat spun like a helicopter rotor, slowing her descent, while the thick forest canopy acted like a giant cushion. But the real twist? Juliane didn't panic. Her parents were zoologists, and she had lived for years at a research station in the jungle. While the world saw the Amazon as an enemy, Juliane saw it as home. She knew she shouldn't look for rescue planes. She had to look for water. For 11 days, Juliane waded down streams with a swollen eye and a deep gash on her arm. She followed the jungle's golden rule. Small streams lead to big rivers, and big rivers lead to civilization. But the Amazon began to eat her in the most painful way. Flies began laying eggs in her open wound, and soon, dozens of maggots were burrowing into her flesh. It felt like 1,000 red-hot needles, but Juliane remembered her father's method for treating a wounded dog. Finding a can of gasoline, she poured the fuel directly into her wound. The pain was blinding, but it forced nearly 40 maggots to crawl out of her skin. Finally, after 11 days of exhaustion, she found a lumberjack camp. When they saw her, a tattered, gaunt girl appearing from the void, they thought she was a forest goddess from legend. Juliane was the sole survivor of the 92 passengers on Lanza Flight 508. Juliane Koepcke didn't survive on luck alone. She survived on knowledge and an iron will. She didn't fight the forest. She read it like a book. Her story leaves a powerful message. In life or death situations, your best protection isn't your muscles, but what's inside your head. We live in a world dependent on Google and GPS. But if it all vanished today, would you have the knowledge to walk out of your own forest? Juliane fell as a victim, but she walked out as a legend. The world is full of hidden truths and stories that defy belief. If you're ready to uncover more of the most incredible and disturbing mysteries of our history, subscribe to Oddplain. Don't let the next story pass you by. Join us, and let's explore the unknown together. Goodbye.